let's discover what we know about Juno's lore so far in Overwatch 2. Hey and welcome, I'm Hammeh, and Juno has been in her 3-day trial in Overwatch 2, and with her voice lines, interactions and some of her teasers, we're starting to discover a bit about her lore, her story and her place in the Overwatch universe as a character and personality. So let's explore what we know so far. Timecodes in the description below if you want to skip around. Firstly, Juno's released and we now know her name as being Teo Min, or at least maybe some of her names. Take a look at her tag on her spacesuit, and there it is. Now, an interesting couple of names here. We can go into speculation land a little bit. Teo can be Chinese, it can also be Vietnamese as well, and Min is very much, it seems, a Vietnamese kind of name. Now, if Juno's mother is indeed Jia, the person and friend that Mei mentioned in her voice line on Lijiang Tower, then Juno potentially has a Chinese mother and maybe a Vietnamese father. We'll have to wait and find out. We of course have seen in the Juno teaser the drop pod that dropped in Dorado not too long ago and sat in the spawn, a photo of Mei and who we presume to be Jia. Now of course people speculated that maybe just straight up Jia or the photo of the person with Mei could be the actual hero, but obviously Juno is a lot younger. I do like the potentially shared hairstyle between mother and daughter, maybe Juno's taking a leaf out of her mum's book there. And it's worth mentioning with these three, another thing we know about Juno is that she refers to Mei as Auntie in a couple of her voice lines. When she sees Mei killing people, she'll say, "Oh, you scare me, Auntie," and then she says, "Sorry, Auntie," when she kills Mei. Now, just to quickly clear this one up, I have seen some people saying, and some people are a bit confused and saying, "Oh, it's Mei's niece. You know, Mei is a blood relative of Space Ranger, blood relative of Juno." I'm not going to speak with a big brush for all Eastern, all Asian cultures, many different countries, but I can speak a little bit to one area of what I know. So I have some Chinese family, and when I was a kid and when I was growing up, I had blood relative Chinese aunties and uncles, and of course they were called Uncle X and Auntie Y, but I also had various friends of my Chinese side of the family introduced by my parents, and they were also, even though they weren't blood relatives, introduced as Auntie and Uncle also. Very simply in this case, I think that Juno is simply referring to Mei as Auntie, as a esteemed, respected friend of the family, friend of her mother's most likely. This brings up some interesting questions, of course, as to how Juno knows Mei. Maybe she met Mei before going to Mars. She says in a particular voice line when her and Mei spawn that she feels safer with Auntie Mei around as well. This leads quite nicely onto another topic. Some people have been a bit confused about what age Juno might be. If Mei and Juno's mother, Jia, went to grad school together, then how can Juno be calling Mei Auntie, and how can Juno be so young? So let's have a quick little timeline. Now, timelining in Overwatch and dating everything, because we haven't been given precise dates or anything, is an imprecise science at best, as well as the passage of time since things like, for example, the recall and 0 hour, although we are given some rough comparative dates. But we do have a couple of absolute numbers for Mei. Now, Mei's bio age on the website is 33, if that's her biological age, but her real life age, let's not forget, is probably 9 years or so more. It's in the region of, let's say, 42, plus however much time has passed since the events of her animated short Rise and Shine. Remember, of course, that in the events of Rise and Shine, Mei was frozen for 9 years with the rest of her Eco Point Antarctica team, but due to various problems, an attempted rescue mission gone awry, the fall of Overwatch, and more problems, all very well documented in Overwatch Declassified, Mei was actually frozen in cryostasis for 9 years.
Snowball, how long have we all been asleep? What? No! Overwatch would have come for us.
So, Mei's actual age, if she hadn't been frozen for that time, would be around 42. So if you take that in mind, and even if you don't add on any extra time from Mei leaving cryostasis and going to find Winston for the recall, and then the events of 0 hour onwards and everything Overwatch Invasion onwards, if you put Mei at 42, and therefore, let's say Jia, her friend at grad school, was the same age as Mei at 42, Jia in her early to mid-20s could well be having a daughter and then perhaps travelling to Mars. There is just about enough time for Mei maybe to see her friend's daughter, and then for Mei to go off into cryostasis, and Jia and Juno, Teo and family to somehow go off to Mars. Now, of course, you need wonderful technology to be able to fly people to Mars quickly, and of course we have a colony of people surviving on Mars, so we have to assume that that's a thing. So, long story short, I don't think there's any real problem with Juno's age if we put her as being 18 or so, say. Now, whether she's been there her whole life or not, whether she knew Mei before or not, we know that Juno has spent a good chunk of her life on Mars. She identifies herself as Martian. She calls people that she meets in Overwatch in her voice lines Terrans, people from Earth. Now, thanks to the logos on her spacesuit, the logos on her parachute for her drop pod, and indeed our knowledge of the Overwatch universe, we know that Lucheng Interstellar, the Chinese space tech company, were the ones who made Project Red Promise, part of colonizing Mars. It's going to be cool, hopefully, at some point via Juno's story to get a bit more detail about what was going on Mars, but from her voice lines, she's very familiar with navigating dust storms, for example. She says when she kills a tank that she's destroyed asteroids bigger than them. So clearly, however old she is, she's given work with great responsibility, and I can't wait to hear about what life on Mars is like. Also, given that we hear from another of her voice lines that the colony lost contact with Lucheng, and that's one of the reasons her her mission has been sent back so she can get back in contact with Earth, it'll be interesting to see what happened and what went wrong there as well. But more on that later. In terms of Juno's lore and Mars, it's worth talking a bit about Lucheng Interstellar at the moment. If you're not familiar, then Lucheng Interstellar, of course, made and were very involved in the Horizon lunar colony in terms of space exploration, in terms of Project Red Promise, the effort to colonize Mars, we presume. Now, recently in Overwatch lore, with the launch of Overwatch Declassified, kind of the Overwatch lore Bible, up to the point of this second Omnic crisis, if we call it that, and the Heroes Ascendant short story collection, where we actually get a great story where Hammeh returns to Lijiang Tower, Lucheng Interstellar, and has a discussion with the boss of the company, the wheelchair-bound Dr. Chow, and she's been a subject of speculation ever since the wheelchair was seen in Lijiang Tower's level. We learn, without spoiling the short story entirely, and I'll be doing a separate story analysis and lore analysis of that story, the same as I always do on this channel. Check this playlist if you want to see it for the other stories I've done so far in Heroes Ascendant. It's really, really cool that we basically see a conversation between Hammeh and Dr. Chow where we discover a lot more about what Lucheng Interstellar were actually doing on the Horizon colony, why they were experimenting the way they did, and really that they had some pretty horrific failures, in Dr. Chow's words. For every success, like Hammeh and Winston, there were some unspeakable failures in a pretty horrific way, and Lucheng couldn't risk those failures or any such problems being seen on Earth, which is why they did it on the moon. Long story short, Lucheng, much like several of the Overwatch corporations in the Overwatch world, were up to some pretty shady stuff. So, Juno seems all bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, but what were her parents involved with on Mars? A lot of the work on Horizon was a foundation for long-term space travel programs. Did humanity simply settle Mars with the resulting knowledge and research done from the work on Horizon? Some of it was certainly used, I think. Or were there other more, perhaps, nefarious things that Lucheng wanted to do on Mars, even further away from Earth oversight? Finally, a little bit about Juno's personality and how it's expressed, both perhaps through her comparing her life on Earth or Terra to her Martian life, as well as her reasons for coming to Earth in the first place. As I said before, we know that Juno has potentially been destroying asteroids, navigating through dust storms, doing very, very difficult and challenging things, but they were on Mars. They were in her habitat, her environment, what she's used to and competent with. She finds Earth a very, very different prospect. She finds it hard to breathe. She finds problems with the air in a conversation with Iliari. In conversations with Reinhardt, check out my interactions video if you haven't seen these just yet. I've linked it, it's in the description below. She sort of looks for confidence. She doesn't feel proficient. She doesn't feel very mighty. And in some of her lines when she uses her abilities, makes kills, she's kind of constantly talking to herself a bit, reassuring herself. So maybe a touch of anxiety about a couple of things, a certainly big part of getting used to a new environment and new ways of doing things. She, on Rialto, for example, is not used to water everywhere and sees it almost as being a safety hazard. Used to a very arid and different geographical environment, as well as the probably strict protocols of life on a colony base far away from Earth. Juno is clearly finding her feet as she comes to Earth and meets up with the world and the characters of the Overwatch universe. We see flashes of her confidence and sparky personality coming out around the anxiety's edges as well, particularly, for example, in her conversation with Ash. We see that her dad took a lot of westerns as entertainment from Earth to Mars, and Juno grew up on these, which is why she finds Ash so funny, and when she kills McCree, she quotes a quote from one of these westerns too. And to wrap up, Juno has of course come back to Earth, and in her voice line on Lijiang Tower, she wonders why her colony lost contact with Lucheng Interstellar. Now, we have good knowledge and reasons why Horizon was lost contact with on the moon. Indeed, in Hammeh's short story, we discover that Lucheng Interstellar and Dr. Chow had sent up 3 teams, each more armed and bigger than the last, and they still haven't been able to defeat the apes. She has a line which is something like, "We had been improving and so had they." So the apes have clearly been working on their technology while people have been trying to take the base back from them. So although Lucheng Interstellar, according to Overwatch Declassified, went very quiet and tight-lipped about what happened on the moon base, we don't know why Lucheng would have lost contact with their Mars operation as well. For a space company, this seems pretty concerning. So even before we get her bio lore on the Overwatch website, lots of speculation, lots of interesting things we can talk about and wonder about here about Juno's lore. There we go. What do you think of Juno as a character? Are you enjoying playing her in her trial? What do you think of her voice lines and interactions? Do you think she could be involved in any cool stories? I think she's cool for the universe. I think we could explore Mars and a lot of different things through her, and with some of the recent Lucheng Interstellar explorations through Hammeh and his story in Overwatch Heroes Ascendant, there's lots of different ways that space, the final frontier and beyond can be opened up by Juno's story and that of her family too. So can't wait to see what we get in her bio lore when she actually releases in Season 12 of Overwatch 2 and where her story could go from here. Let me know what you think in the comments below. If you like this video, throw a like, subscribe, and I cover everything to do with Overwatch 2's lore, Overwatch's lore since 2015 and beyond. So for lore, short stories, comic analysis, everything to do with the world, lore and story of Overwatch, as well as other games that I cover, check out the playlists here. And a sub would be super handy if you fancy. Cheers for tuning in. I've been Hammeh. Take it easy.